Thank you for joining us. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we are delighted to bring you another art demonstration in partnership with the DuPage Art League. Founded over 60 years ago, the DuPage Art League is dedicated to promoting and encouraging the visual arts through classes, workshops, gallery exhibits, and public programs such as this one. We are grateful to the DuPage Art League for arranging tonight's demonstration by acclaimed artist Clayton J. Beck III painting a portrait from a live model in oils. After graduation from the American Academy of Art in Chicago, Clayton studied at the Palette and Chisel Academy of Fine Arts with Richard Schmidt. Clayton's career began while still at the American Academy, exhibiting at Jody Kerberger's Talisman Gallery and winning awards from the Midwest Pastel Society, the Palette and Chisel Academy, and the Pastel Society of America. After graduation from art school, he began teaching Saturday classes in Chicago. Clayton Beck's love for painting has always been enhanced by his love to teach. He believes that any artist who thinks they understand painting should try teaching, and they will soon realize just how little they know. Clayton has always felt that he has the responsibility to teach because he has had such generous teachers himself, and their gifts should be passed on to the next generation of painters who share this love of art. Please join me in welcoming Clayton Beck.
A lot of times you'll see a light off to the side creating shadows, things like that, more of a Rembrandt look, a three-dimensional look. I was looking for more of a design, shapes, simple shapes, not the three-dimensional form. So this is going to be an interesting painting for me to try and create all that interest and form out of the changes within the lights and some very few shadows. I'm going to get started right away. Jim, I'm going to have you just look right at me. No. Sit the same way. This way, what I'm seeing as I squint down, I'm seeing a very simple set of shapes. The lightest lights are the things that are standing out the best, the strongest, and the darkest darks, like a lot of his hat and things like that, are kind of disappearing into the background. So I'm taking a mental note that they should be that way in the final painting. I'm going to be covering a lot of canvas real fast in the beginning because that's what I see at my deepest squint. If you want to understand what I'm looking at, squint down at Jim and you'll open up your eyes at my painting, and hopefully you'll start to see the things happening on there that I'm experiencing from here. Apparently I'm getting a little violent with my canvas. I'm going to tighten this in a little deeper. Okay. There we go. probably looks like things are a little out of control at the moment, but not quite. Some of these are notes to self uh, for future as I work along. They're going to remind me of what my big thought process was. All right, so sometimes you put paint on, sometimes you take it off. So you can draw with wiping some of the lights out. This is one of the advantages of oil paint over something like watercolor, where you have to work with a single direction. You're always working from light to dark. With oil paint, I can work from middle tones out, or light to dark, or dark to light. I can wipe things back. So there are certain advantages to working in oil that I want to take full advantage of. This is similar to the way that painters of the 19th century, Sargent and Chase and Mancini and these guys painted, by having their work right next to their model and stepping back. I can match size for size, angle for angle, things like that, and they help a great deal when doing this large block-in kind of approach. So all the stuff I can still see as I'm squinting down must be important. So I can put that in the beginning. If something disappears, I can do without it in the beginning. That can be something I hold off till the end. shove something behind there and make it a little more stable. It's important to work cleanly as you work. If you're working in pastel, to keep things neat and clean. If you're working in oil, clean your palette. If you're working in watercolor, the same. As you work, if you have a clean area to work with, you're more likely to be able to mix those colors that you're seeing instead of constantly dipping into dirty stuff. Yes, I'm just as guilty as everyone. I've stayed away from the absolute darkest I can paint and the lightest light that I can possibly paint. I want to get rid of even these little spots on the canvas that are left. This way, what I have on the canvas is a series of middle tones. It's much safer to work that way. If you are working with overly contrasty shapes, you end up with a series of hard edges everywhere. It's very, very difficult to recover from. If you stay in the middle tones and things are closer together, they create a series of soft edges, and those soft edges are then much more pleasing to the eye and much more forgivable. You can correct problems, you can find problems much easier. Each time I'm stepping back, it's kind of a combination of several things. One of them is simply to maintain the same perspective. You know, if I stand here, he looks very different from standing back 5 feet. So I want to make sure I'm coming back to the same perspective. Another thing gives me a chance. How many times have you been painting where you've stood up after several hours of painting and backed off of your work and realized all your drawing was off. If you sit that close to your work, sometimes you can't see the simplest issues. So this allows me to constantly see and check my drawing. By not having a tight line drawing, I kind of have the freedom to move things around a bit. A lot of times, if you have a very tight drawing in the beginning, the fear of losing that kind of overwhelms you, and you end up fearfully painting between lines. I didn't want that to happen in this one in particular, so I started out with no line work at all, which would have terrified me as a student. Everything I did was based on line work, because that's what you're taught in school. Measure, set down a line. Not quite there yet, but I'm getting really close to having a likeness. Something where, at least through process of elimination, I can tell who in the room it is. But if I creep up on this a bit, as far as likeness, there comes a point where I just say, yes, that's it. That's him. I got it. And from that point, I can kind of relax. Then I can concentrate on paint thickness and color changes and things like that, and how I want to arrange certain aspects. But I want to make sure that I don't have any huge drawing errors this early. I mean, I'm literally 15 minutes into this, and I can feel that there's something already starting. That start of something is an anchor that I can kind of hold on to. Now, you're not seeing me, the people who are here are not seeing me holding up a measuring instrument. That doesn't mean in my mind I'm not doing that. There are certain things that are lining up vertically and horizontally. This is just real basic school stuff where you're lining things up. If not, all your figures are leaning, looking like they're falling over, or the eyes aren't straight. But at this point, I've got enough little areas, little clues to what they are with enough color and value change that I can start to see what's lining up with what. Now, if I were thinking about what I was painting, it would be very, very difficult for me to do this. If I were thinking about eyes, nose, mouth, ear, hat, things like that, because I would have to think of how they're formed. Right now, I'm painting like a pure impressionist. Whatever shapes that I'm seeing in front of me, those are the shapes that I'm doing. I have faith that what I'm looking at looks like what it is, and that's all I need. From that point on, I can just concentrate on getting these shapes down. There's an order of importance of sharpness of edge and things like that, and they help to order the direction that I paint things in. Again, if I can see it when I'm squinting way down, it must be really important. All right. This would be probably what most people would call the block-in stage. When are you going to start the real painting stage kind of thing. This is just as important as any stage in the painting, if not the most important, because everything is based on this, everything that comes after this, as far as color, value, drawing, composition, design, all of these things are now being helped by this start. If I were planning on glazing or other oil painting techniques, I would have no problem taking a palette knife and just kind of scraping down any thick areas, letting it dry, going in a week from now and glazing something over. But this is an alla prima painting, which basically just means it's all done in one shot. Whatever 8:30 rolls around, that's it. I'm signing it, it's done. I don't touch it again. So that is painting my experience rather than painting things. My experience is ending at 8:30, therefore the painting is ending at 8:30, and that's what it is. I'm fairly sure some of you are wondering, when's he going to get to this part or that part? Yeah, I sit there in demos and think the same thing. So I understand your pain and frustration, but I'll be painting as things occur to me visually again. Not what's important. I know his ear is important. He likes to listen to music. It's not important to me right now as other things. So what is physically important or form or occupying space is not as important to me in this particular study. There are other ones I do that are more like the way I was taught in school. Sure. How's that? in about a minute, we're going to take a break. And just before that, I want to have a good idea of where I am and where I'm going with the next. Having a plan will allow me in a particular amount of time to finish or to complete an idea. I think of painting these kinds of paintings more like that I am completing an idea more than I'm completing a painting. More edge right there. Okay, let's take a break. We can field some questions if anyone has any.
All right, thank you. Someone is asking, are the paints or the oils thinned with Gamsol?
Are they what with Gamsol?
Are they thinned with Gamsol?
Yes, a bit. I'm also using Gamblin's solvent-free gel. So these are things to thin the paint down to get it to go on a little smoother. Otherwise, I would be dealing with very thick paint as it comes out of the tube. And covering up the canvas, I don't want to have a lot of thick paint on there in the beginning. Very difficult to continue painting into thick paint. So there's really quite a bit of transparent paint on the surface, and it's going to be fairly easy to overpaint should I choose to do so.
Okay, thank you. We'll do one more question from the virtual audience, and then we'll bring the mic to the in-person audience. Someone's asking, is there an undercoating on the canvas?
There's a primer on the canvas. The canvas is linen that I've mounted, and the linen was double primed with an alkyd-based primer. I used to use lead-based primers, but they're very difficult to get. They're fantastic primers to paint over, but alkyd is kind of the new thing. By new, I mean probably 3 or 4 decades, but it promises to probably be the most permanent way to oil paint. It's more flexible than traditional oils when they're dry, less likely to crack, especially if you're working on a non-rigid surface. I'm working, as I said, I've mounted this to a board. So this is a rigid surface, and I don't have to worry so much about a loose floppy canvas and paint cracking, but I still like to work as permanently as possible. And the ground is just a white alkyd ground.
Okay, and I don't know if you want to stand in our preset positions when you're answering questions.
I just wondered if the thinning agent you spoke of or the gel affects the drying time of the paints.
Absolutely.
In a good way?
Let me just grab it. Gamblin's solvent-free gel, let me unroll the rest of it here. Safflower alkyd medium, painting medium. Non-toxic, so it's kind of nice if you're painting out of your kitchen or somebody else's house. A lot nicer bringing this in than a can of turpentine. And yes, it dries very fast. Not as fast as acrylic, not as slow as oils, but you're probably bone dry and ready for varnish on a not real thick painting, but in a matter of weeks or a month rather than 6 months.
Okay, did anyone else in our in-person audience have any other questions for now? Thought I saw another hand. Here we go.
How do you adhere the linen to the board?
I bought a hot wax machine. it melts a binder, a wax polypropylene binder, and it has rollers, and I roll the canvas through it, and it puts a coat on the back, and I just stick it to whatever inert material. This happens to be, I think, gator board or possibly ultra board. Either one or both are quite archival.
Okay, and we've got another question from our virtual audience. Are you using water-based oils?
No, no, I don't use water-based oils. My friend Dan got a set. He hated them, gave them to me. I hated them. I gave them to one of my students. I don't know where they are now. They're not anywhere near what oil paint does. If you want to paint water-based, paint acrylic. If you want to paint oil-based, paint oil. It's that simple.
Okay. Someone's asking, will there be a list of the colors, or will you be discussing your paint choices?
I will, after an hour or so, I'll put my palette under the camera and I'll just point at my little blobs and talk about them a bit. Okay. Generally, I stay with the tried and true brands of Rembrandt and Winsor Newton, but I also like Gamblin's paint very much. I like the fact that some of them come in larger tubes and only cost a third as much as some of the other small, buying 10 small tubes in another brand. But I've tried Sennelier and Lafranc and Old Holland. I found what I prefer, which is mainly a very buttery consistency, ready to paint right out of the tube for the most part, and that's the Rembrandts and the Winsor Newtons and Gamblins.
Okay, thank you. I know that some of our folks virtually have been experiencing sound problems. Just a few. Please go ahead and turn on your subtitles. The closed captioning is relatively accurate, and that might help with any sound issues that you might be having. Most folks are saying that their sound is okay. Let me just check one more time. Any questions in our in-person audience before we move on? Okay, thank you.
That's oil paint for you. Yeah, when I give a pastel demo, there's a lot less glare, and especially any low lights in the room have a tendency to make it very difficult to see certain brush strokes. Okay, so this is the point. After the first break, for some reason, I made it all the way through school thinking everything I did was wonderful because I never thought to check. I just would start painting as soon as the model got up there. I don't know what was going on with me, but I figured out this is the best opportunity to catch mistakes that you can't fix later because they're so fundamental. So at this point, I'm mentally going through the painting again, looking for the original purpose of the painting. As I said, flat light, design more than form, color changes within the light to show the form, the basic layout of the large shapes. Those are the things that I'm checking right now, and I don't see anything that's a major issue. I have some values that are correct where the color is off, but that's okay at this point. I've got plenty of time to overpaint them. What's far more important to me is to get the value structure correct. Those things that are light, those things that are dark, and all that subtle middle tone stuff that makes up the magic is what I'm squinting and looking at. All right. Let's see. So I was busy answering questions. I probably should have been cleaning my brushes, but that's all right. We'll power on. Gamsol. Okay. Oop. That was a little wetter than I thought it was. All right. We got a little drip. All right. Now, see, if that had happened in watercolor, I'd be starting over. Oil paint's a bit more forgiving. Some of you may be noticing that the dark brush strokes have a tendency to glare the light more than the light ones. That's one of the reasons why you want to keep oil paint in the darks thinner than in the lights. Oftentimes you'll see the lights built up in thick impasto, but whenever you do that with the darks, you run into that issue of glare off of the canvas itself, making it very difficult to see what's going on. Brushes I'm using are standard bristle brushes, pig bristle brushes that I had in school that have been used for hundreds of years. Nothing fancy about them. I have a few soft hair brushes. But for the most part, most of the painting I'm doing is just with bristle brushes. And these are the strong things I'm seeing visually. Are they the most important things in the painting? Well, if I'm doing a portrait, wouldn't the face be more important than the hat? Well, visually, I'm seeing this shape very strongly, and I want to get some of this indicated quite early. Again, if you want to understand what it is that I'm painting, the order I'm painting it in, squint down at the subject. Open up your eyes, and chances are you'll have a better idea of why I'm painting certain things in certain times. Colors don't belong to things. In other words, there's no such thing as local color. If you understand that all the color is coming from the light source itself, you're going to have a much easier time with your color mixing. There are a few things that are constantly being talked about out there, and some of them are just more confusing than anything else. And one of them is warm colors come forward and cool colors recede. They don't. It's that simple. You're not convincing me. I understand what atmospheric perspective is, but unless a fog rolls in off of Lake Michigan between Jim and I'm not going to see the distance from his nose to his ear as being warmer or cooler because of distance. That's silly. It's the light source. The thing that makes something go back or come forward has much more to do with edge. A sharper edge has a tendency to make things feel like they're coming forward. A softer edge oftentimes makes things feel like they're dropping back. If I want to have the hat pass in front of the edge of the face, I will look at the edges that are happening there, and the hat is creating a sharper edge. How you holding up, Jim? Good. All right.
I'm good at this.
All right.
When I was a kid, I used to sit in closets,
I'm running into an early drawing error, but it's much easier to deal with now than later. There we go. When you look at something and it appears light or dark, that's not enough. You have to understand, is it light or dark compared with other things that are light or dark? That's where problems begin, is when you look at something, you see it gets a little darker there and you start adding black in or something like that. Everything needs to be compared. If you compare, everything will fit. Everything will have its place. That comparison thing is what I'm doing every single time I'm stepping back. If I don't do that, everything becomes disjointed, little pieces and parts that don't match up. If I'm going to make a mistake, if I'm going to guess at a value, I want to guess that that value is, if I think it's light, then I'm going to make it a little too dark. If it's dark, I'm going to make it a little too light. In other words, I'm going to stay in the middle tones. If I stay in the middle tones, it's safe because I can always go a little lighter or a little darker. Whereas if I go too contrasty, I've created too many sharp edges, and it's very difficult to recover from. Even just those last couple of minutes, those beginning to form the center part across the face has made a huge difference in the perception of it. There was something going on before, but now there's something real going on. Now there's something that I can see whether or not the final painting is going to work, that kind of feeling. I can feel it that one of you is thinking he's never going to pull this one off. I am bound and determined to prove you wrong. All right. If I were looking at this when I was a student at the academy, I'd be thinking, man, he's never gonna fix this, because there wouldn't have been enough detail for me to grab onto to feel comfortable. It was the detail that made me feel that I was on the right track when I was young. Different now, much different. If you have a preconceived idea as to what something is, like you've learned how to paint an ear or mouth or something, a lot of times that becomes what's in your mind as you're painting, and that's when you begin to lose the likeness, because you're making that chiseled looking ear or nose or whatever that you learned how to paint in school or learned from a drawing book. If your subject differs from what you know, be true to your subject. There's an honesty that happens with your work when that happens. I don't mean that you have to blindly copy everything that you're seeing. That's not the case at all. I'm still making choices. And a lot of the choices are unconscious. I just don't even think about them. I don't stare at people and pick pieces and parts that I like or don't like or whatever. But I look at some people's paintings and I do see that. I see an obsession with certain things that I don't see. So I realize that person sees differently from me, which is what makes their signature on their painting work. Different from mine. I sign my paintings because that's the way I saw it. Try to paint in as many circumstances as you possibly can. Outside, inside, people, still lives. The more you paint other things, the more you'll come back to the subject that perhaps you love the most with a better understanding. Okay, why don't we take a break? Oh. That pallet's getting heavier. It's actually leaving a mark these days.
Speaking of your palette, Clayton, would this be an appropriate time to take a look at the palette like we
Sure.
talked about?
Sure. Excuse me. All right, here's my messy palette. That's okay, right there. How we doing? All right. Everybody wants to know the colors. Titanium white, a series of cadmiums from lemon yellow to cadmium pale, cadmium orange, cadmium red, medium, cadmium red deep, alizarin, and I think that's alizarin, and this is the quinacridone. I'm actually using up some old tubes. Some people have left me some things over the years and I want to get rid of them. And they're excellent paints, and so they're kind of fun. Like I don't normally have burnt umber on my palette. It's not a particularly pleasant color to me, and it's usually used for underpainting because it dries the fastest. But I had a tube of it. I put it out. I decided not to bring the burnt sienna or the modern replacement being transparent oxide red. I did not bring that, and I decided to use this and try to combine that with the alizarin and see if that works. Not really. Not really. I still don't like burnt umber much, but it's not bothering me nearly as much as it used to. I have figured out burnt umber was on John Singer Sargent's palette because I'm seeing that in some of the lighter flesh tones. Yellow ochre, I prefer the lighter pale versions, not yellow ochre light, but yellow ochre pale. And then I don't have a problem having ivory black on my palette. And if you notice, it's not on the end of the palette, it's in the middle. I grouped my earth colors from Venetian red through the dark browns, the yellow ochre, and the ivory black. I actually think of it as ivory blue because you add a little white to it and it acts like an earth blue. It's not powerful in tinting strength. It doesn't overpower the other colors. It works very nicely in certain mixtures. and it doesn't bother me. So it's on my palette, and sometimes it's not. It wouldn't bother me, and I certainly don't use it for my darks. There are plenty of other color mixtures that work much better for the darks. Viridian, and here's another one that I normally have is cobalt blue, but I'm trying, I have a tube of Antwerp blue by Winsor Newton, and I figured I'd try it. It's probably some variation of phthalo blue, and then ultramarine blue deep. So what I've done is my blues are over here, my yellows and reds are over here, my earth colors are here. If I want to do an entire painting from the center, it'll look like older paintings simply because these pigments weren't available. So if you want that look of medieval on through probably early Baroque, you would have more of the earth tone colors. Then some of the other chemistry started working, and they started to get some of the other colors. They were able to fake lapis lazuli, and it was no longer more valuable than gold. I think it was 1820s or so. Somebody figured out how to make ultramarine blue. I mean, it literally means over the ocean, ultramarine. It's from Afghanistan. So every time we have a war with someplace or politics, cadmiums come from South Africa. That's why they're so expensive. Every time there's a problem somewhere in the world, our paint costs go up. So, but the earth colors are all, we're doing okay with Italy right now. So our siennas and our yellow ochres are good. And the titanium white, I used to like Lafranc-and-Bourgeois, and if you have an old list from one of my classes, it says Lafranc-and-Bourgeois titanium white. It is so thick I can't squeeze it out of the tube. I hate that because it forces me to mix medium in with it, which means now I have to become a chemist. And I don't want to be a chemist, I want to be an artist. So I would like something that is a little more paintable right out of the tube. And again, Gamblin's white is fantastic. So I mostly use that.
Titanium white?
Yes. I've never painted with flake white, which is lead white. Some people are obsessed with using other people's formulas from the past. I'm not. I know that the modern pigments that we're using are far superior to everything in the past. If Rembrandt could have grabbed this palette of colors, he would have gone nuts. He would have absolutely loved it. So titanium, stay away from zinc. Zinc cracks by itself. A little bit in with the titanium is okay, but pure zinc, when you're painting, it cracks like crazy. It's just a relatively unstable film. And most of us in the West like the titanium white. It's very white. It's a very cool white. All righty.
All right, thank you so much. Are there any questions in
Please.
our in-person audience? If you just raise your hand, and then we can make sure that you get the mic. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Is an Irish uniform, the uniform.
Oh, what is your uniform?
Oh, okay. I'm a big history buff. I've been doing revolutionary
I'm sorry, if you
reenactment
could-
I'm a big history buff. I've been doing revolutionary reenacting since 1970. And I probably have like 30 different uniforms. This uniform is the 6th Virginia uniform. 6th Virginia, okay, from 1777, okay? And the group I belong to is, in fact, there is a lot of artists in our group, believe it or not, a lot of history teachers too.
Mhm.
And so I just love history, except I figured out you couldn't make a living at it just like others.
Well, you look very elegant.
All right. Thanks.
Subject matter.
All right.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from our in-person audience?
I just don't understand that one thing that he put.
You want to go ahead and
different. What is it, that line down here in the center?
That's the fold in the hat.
Oh, that's what it is.
Yep. Well, being a vertical stroke, it's probably causing glare to happen. As I said, the dark strokes tend to show up the glare more. So if you stand or you move, it'll change. Usually what I do, again, is try to keep my darks fairly thin without the deep tracks of the hairs. And that's another thing that the medium will do. It has leveling properties. It kind of takes some of the deep tracks of the hairs of the brush strokes and levels them out a little bit. I don't like that glass smooth surface myself. As soon as any dust gets on it, it just loses all feeling of depth at all. That glass smooth black glazy background, I just don't particularly care for that. But if there's something that's bothering me, I can always take a very soft hair flat brush and just lightly, delicately take the tops of those hair tracks down, and it won't change the direction of the brush stroke, won't change the color of it. The only thing it'll do is kind of take some of that glare off. A good coating of varnish a lot of times will take care of that too. Well,
So the question was what type
yes,
of brushes?
what type of varnish? You'd be much better off asking Baumgartner, the guy on YouTube that does the restoration stuff. He's fabulous. I have always liked just a simple Damar varnish that everyone's used for hundreds of years, but I understand the yellowing properties of it and its tendency to need to be removed and reapplied. The modern varnishes are fantastic. They're the UV protectors. I haven't done enough research to recommend one over the other, but I would get a hold of a conservator and ask them. They would be much better at it. And I can imagine that it wouldn't be any price difference from the traditional varnishes.
Okay,
All right.
if we still have another minute or two for a couple of our
Sure.
virtual folks questions. Someone is going back to the water-based oils. They're asking, would you say that those water-based oils are less vibrant in color? They're interested in the difference, if there's a difference other than the cleanup.
I have nothing to say. If you use them, the only way that I could use them was straight out of the tube with no water. And I can paint that way because I do it all the time in oil without adding thinner or medium to it. But if I'm going to do that, I might as well use my oils. So the only thing I really hated was that first wash that I put on here has a deep, rich transparency and a buttery, oily look, and I like that. And the water-soluble oil, miscible oils that are out there, and this is me from 20 years ago, look nothing at all like that. It wouldn't do anything I wanted it to do. So I took the water away, I squeezed the paint out, I used the paint directly, and it was fine. I don't know as far as longevity or, anything like that. And I think, yeah, it sounded like margarine to me. The way they figured out how to make margarine is the same thing, water miscible oils. So I don't know enough about it to talk as an expert.
Okay. Speaking of longevity, someone's asking, how old is your oldest paint, and how long does paint last in the tube?
If the tube's never been open, it'll last a long time. If you've opened it and any air has been allowed to get into the tube, oil paint doesn't dry by drying the way that watercolor does. It's a chemical process where it's actually absorbing oxygen. It's rusting. It's the same thing that rust does. Oxygen attaches to the molecules. So an oil painting actually gets heavier when it begins drying. And then when it goes through most of its drying lifetime, then it begins to lose weight. If you actually physically weighted it, because the large oxygen molecules are actually changing it. Ralph Mayer's book talks about it very nicely. So the handbook for the artist, and it explains the drying of oil. The reason why we use linseed oil or safflower oil, walnut oil, and I can't remember, there might be one or two others that are used, is because they're called drying oils, because they absorb oxygen and they actually dry. You spill motor oil on the ground and it's just oily forever because it's not a drying oil. That's why we can't use certain oils in our mixtures. So knowing something about the chemistry helps you to know how to pick your materials. The reason why you might pick safflower oil in a white is because it doesn't yellow as much as the linseed oil does when it's drying. Safflower oil stays lighter, but linseed oil is the best. It's the classic. It's been around forever, thousands of years. It's been used in oil paint for at least 700 years. And some of the things that were done in the 15th century look as vibrant as though they were painted yesterday. If you know what you're doing with the chemistry and you don't do crazy things, super thick paint for no reason, it's going to crack and fall off over time. Or just mixing inferior grades. If you're going to paint, the student grade stuff just isn't worth it at all. You end up using 2 or 3 times as much of the paint, so any cost that you saved buying it doesn't make it worth it. So having all those extra chemicals in the student grade paints aren't worth it. Just buy the professional grade stuff, bite the bullet, and they'll last you much longer. You'll do many more paintings with those.
Okay, if we just have one more question from our virtual audience. They ask, how do you avoid mucking up the colors when the paint is still wet next to the area that you are painting next?
Yes, the age-old question of wet into wet painting. How do you do it? I tend to overpower. Other people will scrape back. So as you're learning to paint, I love open studio, that opportunity to just go in and experiment all the time. Other people are paying for your model. It's wonderful. You get a chance to practice everything. And through practice, I figured out what colors that I could easily cover. If I put a thick stroke of alizarin crimson down and then I tried to put a yellow ochre over it, it's never going to cover the alizarin. It's going to mix immediately and disappear. The other way around might work. So through experience, I found out that certain colors were easier, were more powerful, and would cover others very nicely. Also, a brushstroke contains so many things. The speed that you pull it at, how much paint you have on the bristles, how stiff the bristles are, how long the bristles are, how much pressure you put on that brush. All of these things contribute to whether or not the paint is going to come off onto the canvas or board the way that you want it to. So.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll let you get back to painting.
All righty. The fun part. Where am I? Okay. I'm almost done. No. I got a little more to do. All right. Again, I come back and I don't have a brush in my hand. I can't tell you how many times I see people, before the model has even settled back into the pose, already have a brush in their hand, ready to strike that canvas like a cobra. I never once checking to see if what they're doing is what they think what they're doing. I want to make sure, first of all, I get the drawing right, because if the American Academy just drilled into me, if the drawing's off, forget everything else. Doesn't matter how good the color is, you know, all that stuff. After that, I'm checking values and design and composition and eye movement and things like that. All that isn't bothering me. Some of the glare is bothering me. Having this light right next to my head is not the easiest thing. But again, paint under lots of different situations so that it doesn't bother you. Learn how to paint when somebody is talking in the back. Another thing that Open Studio helps with is that you have to deal with personalities. You know, you have to deal with models that may be twitchy. Not that my model's perfect. He sits like Mount Rushmore. But I like going down to the palette and chisel, and I've just started up Acorn to Oak Studios in Oak Lawn. So on Sundays and Wednesdays, we have open studio sessions in the afternoon and the evening, and we're going to be adding more on. And it's purely selfish. I just don't like driving downtown anymore. And we've got a big parking lot, and we're right off the Metro. So Acorn to Oak Studios, just look it up on Facebook. We'll have a website, and you know, we'll be more up and running soon. But that's the basis of getting better at painting. In school, I learned the basics, and then coming to Open Studio and painting constantly is what made me the artist that I am. It made whatever a style is, because I no longer look like my student stuff. I don't look like my teachers. And people say they know my work when they see it. I look at it and it just looks normal to me, you know, because it's my brain looking at it. So, all right, let's see, where are we? I don't see any major issues. I think I can continue where I left off. Yeah, so let's do so. This was one of those areas that I said was the wrong color, but the right value. If you notice, I changed the color without changing the value. So if I'm going to have a problem, as long as the value's all right, I can adjust the color. But if the value is off, it doesn't matter what I do with the paint mixture color-wise, it's not going to fix it. So learn how to squint, learn how to see things in a simple way, separate your lights from your shadows, that kind of thing. Again, if I'm going to make a mistake, the lights are going to be too dark, darks are going to be too light. This area I'm working in right now, this was a light, but I'm able to move away from middle tones into the lighter lights. If I painted it too light, it would have stood out more than it did, and the edge would have been too strong and it would have been distracting. By having that, if you want to call it a mistake, but I'm holding back on the values. By having that middle tone instead of the lightest light, it wasn't distracting to all of the other things. I've got a lot of subtle stuff going on in the face with this flat lighting, and I want to make sure that I don't have overly contrasty areas around it, because it'll cause me to paint overly contrasty all over, and then it gets very difficult because you run out of values quickly. Shorted myself on brushes today. All right, we'll see. If you notice, I'm not getting locked into a single area to work. Although I do work that way also. It's called direct painting, where every brush stroke is a finished brush stroke and you start in one point and just finish as you go out. It's a wonderfully satisfying way to paint, but that's not this one. This one, I'm moving around and painting greater contrast areas. That's why I'm moving from hat to face to shoulder, all over the place. I'm having this thing coming out of, it's like he's walking toward me out of a fog. It's getting more clear as it moves along. And don't forget, it's only paint. Don't be afraid of it. Wonderful thing about oil paint is it comes with a nice eraser. You just take that palette knife and scrape it off and your worst sins are gone. What appears to be just a gray jacket is changing constantly in color, even when I walk in front of the light. But as I move from here to the other shoulder and then up toward the top, the color is shifting all over the place. There are other lights coming in. There's other amounts of lights falling. And I'm finding it kind of fascinating to follow a few of those. And I have to be careful because my self-entertainment might end up not finishing the things that I'd like to finish in here. Okay. I remember being in Norman Rockwell's studio and looking at the floor. Everyone else is looking at the wonderful skylight. I'm looking at the floor, and I could see that he has just scratched up and worn out a certain part of his floor. And I realized exactly where his easel was and exactly where he stood and how he walked back and forth. And I looked at the skylight. It was the exact point that he set his easel at the correct angle, not to have glare all over his canvas like you're probably seeing. Right now, I've eliminated most of the glare. The unfortunate thing is you can't stand exactly where I am while I'm painting, or you wouldn't be seeing that glare. I think it's fascinating to see other painters' studios and see how they've used them, because the studio itself becomes a tool, like brushes or anything else. So it's kind of fascinating to see such an incredible painter, absolutely underrated painter of the 20th century, brilliant, and he ran into the same issues that I've run into, that he's dealing with oil paint and glare. He's dealing with it on a different level from me, because he also has to paint knowing that it's going to be photographed instead of as it is. I'm not thinking about this being photographed or reproduced or whether the colors will be true. Whatever I leave it at is what it is, and I'm happy with that. He had a completely different set of rules he had to deal with, which was other people's approval. Can you imagine telling him he had to repaint an area? No.
I lived through that.
Mm-hmm.
Art by committee.
Yes. If you walk into a painting studio, an open studio, and all the benches and easels are painted gray, decisions by committee. Nobody could figure out what color to make it, so everything got painted gray. And I ask some of these people, would you do that in your house? Would you paint everything gray because you can't figure out what color to make it? Make a decision. Let your studio have some personality. As long as it's not bright colors, it's all right with me. We got about 5 minutes, and we're going to take a little break, and then that'll be the last break before we go into finish. And by finish, it means the time is ending, not I'm going to make you happy with the painting I do. My criterion as to when I'm done is different from yours or anybody else's. I'm less interested in pleasing anybody but myself, which is terrible, but it's the only way to be a painter, I think. Can you believe it? Jim actually asked me if he should wax his mustache before we came. Gotta have that. Absolutely.
Well, the best thing is watching Clayton take costumes. I have a lot of stuff, right, Clayton? I just lay everything out.
Yep.
He knows exactly what he wants.
I've been lucky enough to paint many of Jim's costumes. From top hat and tails to red coat, red stuff. It's absolutely fascinating. Polish infantry uniforms. it's still him. But
Get a life.
yeah, it's a, you didn't know your whole life was leading up to me painting you many times. Now, I could be thinking, I could change my thought process and be thinking all the Latin names, you know, of zygomatic arch and superciliary arches and different muscles, levator muscles. I don't want to make this an anatomy study. If I run into trouble, I can always do that. I can always go back to, you know, the basic stuff in school and fix something and then continue again. But I don't think I've got anything down that's really so out of character to what's in front of me that I have to do that. So I'm just going to keep continuing with the thought process I've got so far, and I'm going to have faith that it will carry me through to the end. If I do that, and that's the only definition that I've ever been able to come up with when I'm walking through a museum, if that masterpiece comes to mind, the word masterpiece, that means that something has been thought about with a single thought through the entire process. Can you imagine, you know, Rembrandt's Night Watch, painted for months and being able to concentrate so much that every stroke of it contributed to his vision of what that was? Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So for me, if there is a definition for that, it would have to be that someone was undistracted, undeterred, unchanged from their original thought. So if you find yourself often changing your thoughts, like now it's time to think this or now it's time to think that, that changes what shows up on your canvas. Everything on your canvas is a thought that you're having. If your thoughts change, what shows up on the canvas changes, and you end up with disjointed pieces and parts. Now I'm thinking about all the things I'm not thinking about. I'm not thinking about the 7 pieces of cartilage that make up the end of the nose and things. You know, I have to make sure that I maintain my thought process through this. But it is fun to realize all of the things that I've learned from great books and great people who have been my teachers. So lucky to have this information available relatively easily. Okay, let's take a break.
Okay, so we'll take a couple of questions. I do want to zoom in on the painting just a little bit. Someone has a question about the areas that may still appear white. Could be a glare, but they're also wondering if there are some areas on the canvas that you've allowed to stay white, and will you go back and paint those in?
I don't know if we're talking about the hair and the stripes and the cheek, because those are the failings of technology. In a CCD, in a camera, it's not able to capture what our eyes capture. This is why you hang a picture on the wall and you've never thought you were looking out of a window. A photograph is not the same thing that we see. So part of the problem is that this is going through several computers, being probably simplified by Zoom in order to get it to stream, which means that it's throwing out a lot of information. So some of the things that the people are seeing are not what the people who are present are seeing. That's one of the difficulties about Zoom. The great things about streaming is that how would we ever be able to see some of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as kind of a follow-up question, the person, someone's referring to the collar under the chin. Will that be painted white, or how will you handle that?
Will it be painted white or will it be covered? The collar is white. There is a white collar and a black sash underneath, and it is a different color from the leather sash that's coming across that is holding, what is that bag called again? I forgot.
Haversack.
Haversack bag. And each of these whites are different colors to me. So I'm seeing the collar is more blue and the leather strap as being much more yellow.
Okay, so they're adding a follow-up question here. So you're saying that they're asking, is the collar pure canvas, or have you applied paint there?
There's no blank canvas. There's no blank canvas there at all. Yeah, I covered up everything except for a couple of spots right at the very edge of white canvas. So everything you're seeing within the face is all paint.
Okay, great. And we will take a couple questions from our in-person audience as well, but I wanted to remind you that you have those paintings in the back there on that table. I don't know if you wanted to comment about any of those.
Yes.
During this break.
Can we switch over? I brought a few paintings in. I'll turn the other one around again. These are recent paintings. Try to get some glare off of them. This one is lit very much like the one I'm doing now, with the light very close to me and kind of flat, very designy. You could see that the areas of light are relatively flat. Okay, different from the smaller piece here, which has much more of a Rembrandt lighting, that dark under the chin, that dark shadow cast by the nose. The difference between that and that is mostly just lighting. The paint is the same. Paint handling's a little bit different, but not much. These are all open studio paintings, with the exception of this one. This is my example of direct painting that I brought in, which is I completely finish an area and I just keep working until the session is over. This was a friend of mine, and I found this one in my searches for something, and I realized the look that I was getting, the intimate look I was getting from my friend as I was painting it, different from the hired gun models that I often have in open studio. So I wanted to bring that one in as an example of direct painting where every brush stroke is just finished. I never go back and correct anything. Whereas what I'm doing here is a development process. I'm blocking in and then kind of refining. Nope, none of all of these were started just paint right on canvas. This was a demo I just did a couple of days ago, and it was a 2-hour demo, which is fairly quick. I didn't get to develop out all of the values that I wanted to in the lights, but still I got to the important stuff, and the important stuff was a likeness and facial expression. And so even though I wasn't able to do everything I wanted, I got something down that was important to me. I brought in this center one. You may find it difficult to even see what it is on camera, but the edges, the difference between this one and this one are tremendous. When I squinted down and the dark flesh, dark hair, relatively dark background, everything got soft and disappeared. So instead of complaining, I decided to paint it just like it is. So whereas this one has that stark, simple design, this one, all you see is the sleeve, and you really have to search for all those beautiful soft edges, which makes it a little bit more mysterious. This one's a little bit more direct. This one was actually an exercise in painting small. I don't have small brushes. I don't have miniature little brushes, little 2-hair brushes. I wanted to see how small I could paint, so that was the exercise. That's the nice thing about having models often in open studio, is that you can try something out and you don't feel like, oh, this is the only opportunity I have to paint this month, so I better make it good. Or even worse, I'm painting for a show or a gallery or a competition, and the pressure is on. So get to open studio as much as you can. These things are fun to do. They're very different from each other. I call it the what if game. What if I start out light? What if I start out dark? What if I start out soft? What if I start out with a clean, simple design? And what if and when I was in school, it was, what if I start out with line work? What if I start out with masses? Now I've kind of developed my own way of doing it, but without having that time, hundreds and hundreds of hours of open studio to practice and just try these things out, I may never find what my potential is. And I'm still searching, I'm still enjoying. So get to the open studios as much as possible.
Any questions in our in-person audience? Yeah.
As someone who's just starting out painting, I start out with acrylics and a little bit of watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
But for acrylics, what would you recommend, like some paint brands?
Most of the professional paint brands carry an acrylic line. So I can imagine, I haven't bought acrylics since school. It was Liquitex when I was in school, but that was,
That's still the standard.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I don't know. That's a great question. I'm gonna have to look that one up. I don't.
Okay, any other questions in our in-person audience? Okay, it'll take me a second to get over there.
You had mentioned that linseed oil was your preferred medium.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried any of the, I believe they're alkyd-based mediums like Gamblin's Galkalin and stuff?
Yes, Galkyd.
They're Galkyd. It's in a bottle. It's not in a tube.
Yeah, but this is alkyd based. The difference with this is that it doesn't have the solvent in it that the others do. The others have what is their thinner? Gamblin's Gamsol?
Gamsol, yeah.
Gamsol is used in it. It's not used in here. It's just safflower oil in the solvent-free gel. The Galkyd I use, I didn't bring it today. Actually, for the first 30 years, I didn't use any medium at all. I just used paint straight out of the tube and turpentine, but I've grown to want more techniques available to me. I don't buy the Galkyd Light. Sorry, Gamblin. All it is the regular Galkyd with more thinner in it. So you can.
Yeah, one of them has a retarder in it, I think, and one is an accelerator.
They're an absolutely wonderful company. They have come up with what I think are probably the most permanent line of chemicals, because they're not a 100-year-old company hanging on to some old formula. They're a fully modern company doing the best they can to put out the best materials possible, and I like them very much.
Yeah, I like their paints too.
Yep.
Any other questions in our in-person audience?
All righty. Let's get some painting done. All right. Now, again, no brushes in my hands. When you come back from a break, always check. Give yourself that opportunity to find a problem. Once the model's gone and then you find the problem, well, what are you going to do? You're going to fake it. And if you couldn't get it when the model was there, you're not going to get it when the model leaves. So don't bother trying to fake it. All right. Now, if I were commissioned to do something, it would be a very different painting. If I were commissioned by the Revolutionary War people to represent this particular setup here, I would feel the pressure to satisfy them. I am picking and choosing certain things that I'm deciding are important to me and some that aren't. That wouldn't be available to me if I didn't make this completely my painting, my decisions. Yeah. I like working from life. I like the changes because they give me choices. Some people absolutely just want to work from photos. They don't want any changes happening. They don't want to think about anything. They don't want to run out of time, pay the model, whatever, have light changing because the sun is moving. I'm exactly the opposite. I very much like real life. I like to be feeling that this is an expression of a day that I'm having. Everything that I'm painting here is part of coming here and doing a demonstration for the DuPage Art League. This is in the painting itself. It's not just my thoughts. And that then makes this an experience of something very specific, which makes it a personal statement to me. That's what I want my work to be, a personal statement of whatever day that I'm having, good, bad, or indifferent. That's what's coming out on the canvas. Ooh, that didn't work, did it? All right. Well, that's actually a good thing. That's the wrong value. That's the wrong value, and I know it immediately because all the other stuff is correct. It's the suddenly something wrong showed up, and I know it. If I didn't have the correct stuff around it, I would put it down and don't, I'm not sure if that's wrong. I'm not sure what's going on. If you have that feeling of, I don't know what to do, chances are there are a lot of problems, and it's not just one. I've got one problem. It's too light. How do I fix it? I make it darker. It's that simple. Not easy, but simple. All right, so I just had the same. I thought I had put different paint on there. I did not. Okay, so don't forget your concentration. All right. Again, it's oil paint, nothing more. Okay, so got rid of it. And now let's see if I can get that correct value. And part of me is having fun thinking about the things that I don't want to think about, right now, because of what I said earlier. There is a mentalis muscle, is that thing that gets all lumpy when you pout or do something. And so part of my mind is a little distracted and I'm having fun in my own head. So let's see but all that stuff will come out in the painting. So be careful what you think. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes, if that. And time is one of the factors that's what I'm doing here. So that is one of the elements. How much time do I have? What am I capable of? What did I want to get to that maybe I haven't yet? So not just what do I want to do, but what do I have time to do? And being honest. And until you do enough painting, you don't know what you're capable of. So again, get to the open studios. Be interesting to take a still of this after the first half hour and see where I am now. And you would see there's not a lot of change. There's a little bit of change. There's refinement. But most of what I wanted to say was probably there in the first half hour. The only thing that's changed is that I have more paint, more values, more variety of edges. Right now, I'm allowing my eye to kind of wander around and see what needs refinement. There are times when folds change and little things happen. Long hair doesn't come back the same way. Ask yourself if it's not just difference, but it could possibly be better. And maybe if it's minimal enough that you could do a little bit of change instead of just automatically yelling at the model and you're not back in place. Ask yourself if the change is better. That's again what I mean by painting from life, is it gives me choices. These small details mean one thing to me and something completely different to Jim. As far as every button, every symbol, these things are to some people serious and mean something that I don't quite understand. So sometimes, if I don't do my research, I may completely misinterpret what something is. I would do a painting of Secretariat and he'd look like a glue factory horse, because I don't know anything about horses. He'd look like he's ready for, the dinner table for somebody. And that can be an issue. If you're painting a golfer on a backswing and you don't understand anything about golf, they may be doing the worst, most horrendous mistake possible, and that's going to reflect in your work. So sometimes knowing something about your subject can give a fuller appreciation of your work to the outside world. Sometimes the opposite happens when you don't understand your subject and you paint it and you make a faux pas and you've insulted a whole regiment because you got the color wrong. So if you don't know your subject, be very careful about taking liberties. Got one more minute, and I'm going to work on this. And one and a half more minutes. said about glare. I got a little too much on this. This is just a dry, clean brush. I just want to knock down some of that glare from that center part. There. Okay, that's it. And I didn't get any paint on me. Yes. Any questions?
There is one question from the virtual audience here. At this point, when it's time to clean up, what do you use to save your brushes when cleaning them? Do you use baby oil, some type of thinner? What is it that you use to clean your brushes?
I squeeze the paint out of the brushes into a rag. I rinse them with the paint thinner, whatever thinner I'm using, which happens to be Gamsol. I take them home and wash them with ivory soap, which is probably a horrible thing, but it's been used for 100 years, and I've had some of the same brushes for 40 years that I've been working with, and they're fine. So what you do want when you're cleaning your brush, the most important thing, this is the handle, this is the ferrule. Never get any water on the handle. What happens to wood when water gets on it? It swells, stretches the metal, handle shrinks, then your brush is all floppy. This is the ferrule. This is the heel of the bristles, right where it touches the metal. That's where you want to clean. Don't worry about the rest of it. The rest of it will clean just fine. And at the risk of getting paint all over me, when I'm cleaning this, these bristles are so tough, 90 degrees into the soap, dig the soap deep into the heel and either run your fingernail through it or get a little brush comb or something. Get that paint out of there. If you go home and you feel those bristles and they're hard, that means they're no longer flexing that hair that is all the way into the ferrule. Okay, that's where all the flex from the hairs come from. And when you leave crusty paint down here, the bristles only flex from here, and that's when they break off. So if you spend 10 minutes at the end of your painting picking little hairs out of your painting, two things: you're buying cheap brushes and you're not cleaning them properly. So get good brushes, clean them properly, they'll last you a lifetime.
Great, thank you. Any questions from our in-person audience? Yeah.
What size brushes do you use the most? What?
If I had to, I have, here we go. What size brushes do I paint with the most? One of the exercises you can do is bring a brush to Open Studio and do the whole painting with one brush. I threaten all the time to my students that I'm going to have a class one day where the only thing we're allowed to paint with is number 10 brushes, which is probably about a 1-inch brush. There's absolutely no reason, if it's a good brush and you've taken care of it, that you can't paint an entire painting with number 10 brushes. You won't be able to get super fine detail, but you can get some very fine detail with it, because once you get enough paint in there, you can actually shape the bristles on your palette and you can get thin lines. You can also put down a brush stroke and put down the next one, cutting that brush stroke down into a little thin line. So get creative, learn how to use your brushes. Look at Sargent. He was one of the very best with a brush in his hand. Try and figure out the order that he painted things in, and great painters of the day gave him credit as being one of the great brushmen. So.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Yes, just a moment.
You said you use ivory soap with water. Is that
hot, cold water, or?
I don't want it too hot because the way brushes are made, they're actually glued at the end before they're put into the ferrule. I don't want to loosen that glue. So tepid, little warmer, but just not, you know, flaming hot or anything. You don't need that. The soap itself and the vigorous action will break up the oil and disperse. Once and another good thing about ivory soap is it's white, so you know when the paint is out of the bristles because your soap is clean. But I've seen people use Dawn dishwashing soap and things like that. They're probably fine. I know the brush manufacturers are probably going to hate me. They sell some very expensive brush soaps that are probably wonderful.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Yes, just a moment.
What is your like #1 brand brush recommendation?
Right now, rosemary brushes are probably the ones that I would recommend. Fantastic quality. They are doing a bang-up job. Just absolutely fantastic. As a basic set of brushes, I've always kind of recommended Robert Simmons for the bristles. But sometimes it depends on who's making brushes that day. You know, sometimes there are more or less hairs in there, and you know, if you go to the art store and you want to pick out a brush and it's got that wheat paste in there, it's starch, it's hard as a brick, it's like a chisel. Ask them for some water so that you can clean that out. And if the hairs go crazy, it's a bad brush. They're using the starch to make it look like a good brush. But other than that, don't buy huge amounts of brushes. Buy a few at a time, really work with them, because you don't know what you can do with them until you're forced to work with them. That's why I say bring 1 or 2 brushes to open studio sometime and just paint the whole painting with that. And believe me, you'll learn what you can do with that brush at the end of that painting.
Okay, any last questions? Clayton, thank you so much. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything more about the open studio that you're setting up in Oak Lawn before we close tonight.
Acorn to Oak Studios. It's going to be a wonderful opportunity for open studios. I'm going to see if I can, with my partners, get this up and running so that we're doing this every week. Right now, I'm still building model stands and getting lighting and all of that. We're having wonderful community development immediately. But we're going to have opportunity for kids. We're going to have opportunity for adults. We're going to have music, all kinds of. It's going to be a very well-rounded thing. My part of it is going to be the open studios and the models and model time, and I'm going to be doing teaching out of there, along with the work that I'm doing at the Palette and Chisel downtown Chicago. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, and just a note to our virtual audience, this program has been recorded. We're going to be doing some editing work on it, and then we will upload it to our YouTube page within a week, we hope. The other thing that you'll want to know is that I'm sending out an email with a number of different links for you in an email later tonight, including contact information for Clayton Beck. And if you are watching the recording and would like those links, please email me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE for community engagement @wheatonlibrary.org, and I'd be happy to send those contact links out to you. But with that, we'll end the recording. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Have a great night, and we'll see you again soon.